My grandmother always yanked my hair hard enough to make my head jerk back and pulled so hard my neck cracked. So, I made her shave her own head completely. My grandmother, Dolores, was 72 and had an obsession with my hair since I was little. I had long curly hair that reached my waist, and she couldn't keep her hands off it. Every time she saw me, she'd yank it hard enough to jerk my head back, then run her fingers through it, saying she was checking if it was real. She'd been doing this since I was 5 years old, and I was 23 now. She'd pull so hard my scalp would ache for hours. At family dinners, Dolores would walk behind my chair and grab a handful to smell it. Said she was making sure I wasn't using cheap products that would embarrass the family. If she didn't like how it smelled, she'd pull harder and tell everyone my hygiene was questionable. When I'd try to move away, she'd grip tighter and say disrespectful grandchildren don't deserve personal space. She'd actually wrap my hair around her fist like a rope and use it to pull me closer when she wanted to criticize something about me. My weight, my job, my relationship status, each criticism came with a sharp tug. At my cousin's wedding, Dolores pulled my hair during the ceremony because she wanted to see if my curls were natural or permed. The whole church heard me gasp in pain. She whispered loud enough for 3 rows to hear that only trashy women got perms, and she needed to check. She pulled out several strands, examining them like evidence while the bride and groom were saying vows. When my mom told her to stop, Dolores said she had a right to know if her granddaughter was lying about her appearance. She'd do this thing where she'd compare my hair to her own. Dolores had thin, dyed blonde hair that she spent $300 on every month at the salon. She'd pull my hair and her own, saying mine was too thick, too ethnic-looking, too attention-seeking. She actually told people I grew it long to show off and make other women feel bad. She'd yank it during photos, saying I took up too much space in frames. During Christmas dinner last year, she grabbed my hair while I was serving myself potatoes and pulled backwards so hard I dropped the spoon. Hot potatoes splattered everywhere. She said clumsy people shouldn't have distracting hair and maybe I should cut it all off. She held my hair like reins on a horse, steering me around the kitchen while telling everyone this was how they trained girls to be graceful in her day. My boyfriend Kevin finally said something, and Dolores called him whipped for defending someone with obviously fake hair. She pulled extra hard to prove her point and actually made my neck crack. But here's what Dolores didn't know. Her precious salon hair was mostly extensions. I found out from her hairdresser Jorge when I went to the same salon. He mentioned my grandmother had been coming for years because her hair was so thin she needed extensions to look presentable. She had maybe 30% real hair left. The rest was $3,000 worth of European hair extensions she got replaced every 8 weeks. She told everyone she had naturally thick hair for her age and good genes. Dolores was hosting her 73rd birthday garden party and demanded everyone attend. She specifically called to tell me to wear my hair up so I wouldn't overshadow her event with my attention-seeking style. She'd already told people she was going to check if I'd followed orders, and there would be consequences if I disobeyed. I showed up with my hair down. Dolores saw me from across the garden and started marching over. I could see her hand already reaching out. She grabbed a huge handful from the back and pulled down hard, saying, "I never learned respect." That's when I stepped sideways quickly. The thing about extensions is they're attached with glue or tiny beads. When you pull them wrong, they come out. And take the real hair with them. Dolores's hand was tangled in my hair when I moved. She didn't let go fast enough. The force pulled her off balance and she grabbed harder, trying to steady herself. I spun away and her hand stayed twisted in my hair, pulling her forward. She fell face first into the dessert table. But the real damage happened to her hair. The sudden jerking motion when she fell had yanked out 3 tracks of extensions. They were hanging from her hand, still tangled in my hair. Everyone could see the bald patches on her scalp where they'd been attached. The remaining extensions were crooked, showing the sparse, gray reality underneath. Dolores tried to get up but slipped on cake frosting. More extensions came loose and fell on the ground like dead blonde snakes. Her real hair was maybe 2 inches long and patchy like a molting bird. People gasped. Dolores scrambled to her feet with cake frosting smeared across her cheek and down the front of her expensive silk blouse. 3 tracks of blonde extensions dangled from her right hand like dead things. The remaining 30 guests stood completely frozen. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Everyone could see the bald patches on her scalp where the extensions had been glued. The spots were shiny and pink with little bits of adhesive still stuck to them. She realized what everyone was seeing and dropped the extensions like they were on fire. Her hands flew up to smooth her real hair over the gaps. But there wasn't enough hair to cover anything. Her real hair was maybe 2 inches long and gray and patchy. It stuck up in weird angles where the remaining crooked extensions pulled it sideways. She looked like a molting bird that got caught in a windstorm. One extension hung down over her left ear at a 45-degree angle. Another track had come completely loose and was sliding down the back of her head. She grabbed at it desperately, but that just made another section come free and fall onto the grass. I stood there with my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Dolores turned to look at me with pure rage in her eyes. Her mouth opened and I knew she was about to scream something horrible. But then she noticed that one of the extensions was still caught in my hair. The blonde track hung between us like a bridge connecting her humiliation directly to me. Someone in the crowd made a sound. It was barely a sound at all. Just a quick exhale through their nose. But it was definitely a laugh. That single noise broke whatever spell had frozen everyone in place. Suddenly, half the guests were biting their lips and looking away. The other half stared with wide, uncomfortable eyes like they were watching a car accident. My aunt covered her mouth with her hand. My cousin's husband turned his whole body away and his shoulders were shaking. Even the caterer standing by the gate had her hand pressed over her mouth. Kevin stepped between me and Dolores before she could move toward me. He stood with his shoulders back and his voice came out firm and clear. "You fell because you grabbed her hair too hard and wouldn't let go." Everyone here saw what happened. Dolores's face went from red to purple. The color spread up from her neck to her forehead. A vein I'd never noticed before stood out on her temple. "You deliberately humiliated me at my own party. You're a disrespectful monster who planned this whole thing." Her voice cracked on the last word. Spit flew from her mouth. She was shaking so hard the remaining extensions bounced against her head. My mom stepped forward from where she'd been standing near the dessert table. Her voice came out quiet, but everyone could hear it in the silence. "Dolores, stop making a scene." The comment was so ridiculous given what just happened that I almost laughed. But then I heard how Mom's voice was shaking. I looked at her face and realized she was actually standing up to her mother for the first time I could remember. Mom's hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Dolores whipped around to face her daughter so fast that another extension came loose and fell at her feet. "Whose side are you on?" The question came out like a hiss. Mom didn't answer right away. She just stood there looking at her mother with something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Raymond moved toward his mother with his hands out like he was approaching a scared animal. He's my uncle and Dolores' son, and he's always been the peacemaker. "Mom, let me help you to a chair. I think everyone should probably leave now." But before anyone could move, Mariah Savage spoke up from near the punch bowl. She's a family friend who's known Dolores for 30 years. "I'm not going anywhere until someone explains what I just witnessed." Other guests started murmuring agreement. People were looking at the extensions scattered on the ground, looking at Dolores's exposed scalp, looking at me with the blonde track still hanging from my hair. The evidence was right there for everyone to see. Something significant had just happened and they all knew it. Dolores started crying. Real tears streamed down her face, mixing with the frosting. Her whole body shook with sobs. "I have a medical condition that causes hair loss. She knew about it. She deliberately caused my fall to expose me in front of everyone." She was actually pretty convincing. The tears looked real. Her voice broke in all the right places. Several people who didn't know her well looked at me with doubt in their eyes. But then Kylie spoke up from the back of the crowd. "You pulled her hair during my wedding ceremony hard enough that the whole church heard her gasp. I was standing at the altar and I heard it." Kylie's voice was steady and loud. She walked forward through the crowd until she was standing next to me. "You've been pulling her hair since she was 5 years old. Don't stand there and act like you're the victim." Dolores's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. The photographer shifted his weight from foot to foot. He held his camera awkwardly. "Should I delete the photos I just took?" Dolores screamed yes. At the same time, 3 other guests said they already had videos on their phones. One woman held up her phone to show she was still recording. Another guest said he'd already sent his video to the family group chat. The realization that her humiliation had been documented and shared made Dolores completely lose control. She started yelling that she was going to sue everyone present for invasion of privacy at her own party. She pointed at different people in the crowd, threatening legal action. Her finger shook as she pointed. More extensions slipped loose and fell. Kevin touched my elbow gently. "We should leave before this gets worse." His voice was quiet enough that only I could hear. We started walking toward the gate. My legs felt weird and shaky. As we got to the driveway, my phone started buzzing in my purse. Text after text came through. I pulled it out and saw messages from family members who were still at the party. Kylie wrote that after we left, 5 other relatives admitted Dolores has been physically aggressive with them too. Always disguised as affection or grooming help. Always with the women in the family. My phone kept buzzing as we got in Kevin's car. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The sound of Dolores hitting the dessert table. The gasp from the crowd. The extensions falling like dead snakes. Part of me felt good. After 18 years of having my hair pulled and my scalp aching and my neck cracking, I'd finally been free of her grip. But another part felt horrible. I'd humiliated an old woman at her birthday party in front of 30 people. Even though I didn't plan what happened. Even though I just stepped sideways. Kevin rolled over and put his arm around me. "You just stepped sideways." Her own grip caused her fall. "You didn't do anything wrong." But the guilt sat heavy in my chest anyway. I kept seeing her face when she realized everyone could see her bald patches. The way she tried to cover them with her thin gray hair. How small she looked covered in frosting on the ground. The next morning, my phone exploded with messages. I woke up to 43 texts and 12 missed calls. Raymond sent a long text calling me cruel and demanding I apologize to his mother immediately. He wrote that she was devastated and humiliated, and it was all my fault. That I should be ashamed of myself for treating an elderly woman that way. But then my mom called. Her voice was thick like she'd been crying. "I've been watching her hurt you for years, and I did nothing to stop it. I'm so sorry. I understand if you can't forgive me either. She started crying for real then. I could hear her trying to hold back sobs. I told her I needed some time and hung up. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. Kevin made me tea and sat with me on the couch while I stared at the wall trying to process what just happened. My mom apologized. After 18 years of watching her mother hurt me, she finally said, sorry. Part of me wanted to be angry at her for waiting so long, but mostly I just felt tired. That afternoon, the doorbell rang and I opened it to find Kylie standing there with a woman I barely recognized. She introduced her as her sister Amanda, who I'd only met maybe 3 times at big family events. They came inside and sat at my kitchen table, and Amanda started talking before I even offered them drinks. She said Dolores grabbed her hair at a family photo session when she was 12 and pulled so hard she had a bald spot for weeks. Her mom told her not to make a fuss because Dolores was just being particular about how everyone looked in pictures. Kylie jumped in with her own story about Dolores pinching her arms during dinner parties hard enough to leave bruises. She'd squeeze the soft underside of Kylie's upper arm while smiling and asking about school. If Kylie tried to pull away, Dolores would pinch harder and tell everyone Kylie was so sensitive and dramatic. Amanda said Dolores once told her she was getting fat at a family barbecue and needed to stop eating so much. She was 14 and going through puberty. Dolores said it loud enough for everyone to hear, and then patted Amanda's stomach like she was being helpful. When Amanda started crying, Dolores called her ungrateful for not accepting honest concern about her health. They kept sharing stories for over an hour, each one worse than the last. Pinches and hair pulls and cruel comments disguised as care. Amanda admitted she stopped going to family events after she turned 18 because being around Dolores gave her panic attacks. Kylie said she almost didn't invite Dolores to her wedding but felt obligated because family. They both looked at me with this mixture of relief and sadness. Relief that someone finally exposed Dolores. Sadness that it took so long and hurt so many people. None of us had told each other before because we each thought we were the only target. Dolores had been so good at isolating her victims. 3 days after the party, my phone rang from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer because I was exhausted from family drama. But something made me pick up. A man's voice asked if I was Dolores's granddaughter, and when I said yes, he introduced himself as Jack Moody. The name meant nothing to me until he said he was Dolores's brother. I'd met him maybe twice in my entire life at funerals. He lived in Oregon or Washington or somewhere far away. Jack said he heard about what happened at the party from Raymond. His voice was quiet and careful, like he was choosing each word. He told me Dolores had been like this since they were kids. She used to pull his hair when their mother wasn't looking and hit him in places that wouldn't show bruises. When he told their mom, she said Dolores was just passionate and spirited, and he needed to toughen up. Jack said he joined the military at 18 specifically to get away from his sister and never moved back. He'd kept minimal contact for 40 years because being around her made him feel like a scared kid again. He wanted me to know that what I did at the party was brave, that standing up to Dolores was something he never managed to do. His voice cracked a little when he said he was sorry he wasn't around to protect the younger family members from her. I thanked him and we talked for another 20 minutes about Dolores's patterns and behaviors. He said she'd always targeted people she thought were weaker or couldn't fight back. She fed on control and attention. When I hung up, I felt this weird mix of validation and sadness. Validation that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. Sadness that Dolores had been hurting people for over 60 years and everyone just accepted it as her personality. Kevin was in the kitchen making dinner when someone started pounding on our apartment door. He went to check the peephole and his whole body went tense. He told me it was Raymond and I should stay in the bedroom, but Raymond's voice came through the door yelling my name and demanding to talk to me. Kevin opened the door and told him to leave. Raymond pushed past him into our living room. His face was red and his hands were shaking. He started yelling that I destroyed his mother's mental health and reputation, that she was devastated and humiliated and it was all my fault, that I should be ashamed for treating an elderly woman so cruelly. Kevin stepped between us and told Raymond to get out, but Raymond ignored him completely. He kept yelling about how Dolores had done nothing to deserve this treatment, how I was vindictive and cruel, how the whole family was turning against her because of my lies. Something inside me snapped. I stepped around Kevin and looked Raymond right in the face. I told him his mother had been assaulting me since I was 5 years old, that she'd yanked my hair hard enough to make my neck crack, that she'd humiliated me in public over and over for 18 years. I asked him where his concern for my mental health was all those years. Where was he when his mother was hurting me? My voice got louder with each word until I was almost shouting. Kevin put his hand on my shoulder, but I shook it off. I told Raymond every single incident I could remember. The wedding, Christmas dinner, every family photo. Every gathering where his mother grabbed me and pulled me and criticized me, while everyone watched and did nothing. Raymond's face went from red to pale white. He sat down heavily on our couch without being invited. His mouth opened and closed like he was trying to find words. He finally stammered that he thought it was just Dolores being affectionate in her weird way, that he had no idea the hair pulling was that serious or had been going on that long. I described the pain in detail, the way my scalp would ache for hours, the time my neck actually cracked. The public humiliation at Kylie's wedding when the whole church heard me gasp. Raymond kept getting paler. He put his head in his hands and sat there for a long minute. When he looked up, his eyes were wet. He said he was sorry, that he should have paid more attention, that he'd been so focused on managing his mother's moods and keeping her happy that he never noticed she was hurting people. Kevin stood by the door with his arms crossed, watching Raymond carefully. I sat down in the chair across from the couch, feeling suddenly exhausted. Raymond asked me to tell him everything, and I did. Every incident I could remember going back to when I was 5 years old. He listened without interrupting, and by the end, he looked sick. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone rang. Dolores' name showed up on the screen. I stepped outside to take the call, and Kevin's advice about recording it popped into my head. I started the voice memo app right before answering. Dolores' voice was cold and controlled. Not the hysterical crying from the party or the warm grandmother voice she used in public. This was something else. Ice cold and dangerous. She informed me that she was telling everyone I attacked her unprovoked at the party. That I'd always been jealous of her beauty and vitality. That I was a disturbed young woman who needed help. She said she was considering getting a restraining order against me to protect herself from further attacks. Her voice never wavered. Every word was calculated. She said the family was turning against her because of my lies and manipulation. That I'd always been a problem child who craved attention. That she'd tried to help me over the years, but I was beyond help. I didn't say anything. Just let her talk while the recording captured every word. She went on for almost 10 minutes, listing all the ways I'd supposedly wronged her. The threats were crystal clear. She was going to destroy my reputation and turn the whole family against me. When she finally finished, I told her I'd recorded the entire call. There was a long silence. Then she hung up. That evening, my phone rang again. This time it was Mom, and she was crying. So hard I could barely understand her. She finally calmed down enough to tell me that Dolores had started calling extended family members. Aunts and uncles and cousins who weren't at the party. She was telling them I physically assaulted her. That I attacked an elderly woman unprovoked. Mom's phone had been blowing up with messages from relatives expressing concern and disappointment in me. Some of them were asking if I needed psychiatric help. Others were saying they never would have expected this from me. I felt sick to my stomach. I told Mom about the recording, and she said to send the video too. The one Mariah took at the party. I pulled up the family group text and sent both. The video showed everything clearly. Dolores grabbing my hair first. Me trying to step away. Her refusing to let go even as she fell. The extensions coming out. All of it captured on someone's phone camera. I added a message saying anyone who wanted the full story should watch the video before believing Dolores' version. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. The video had spread through family text chains and group chats faster than Dolores' lies could travel. Relatives who initially believed her were now sending me apologies. They'd seen the proof. Several of them added their own stories about Dolores' aggressive behavior over the years. One cousin wrote a long message about how Dolores slapped her across the face at a family reunion 10 years ago. She was 17 and wearing makeup for the first time. Dolores told her she looked like a prostitute and slapped her in front of everyone. When the cousin started crying, Dolores said she was doing her a favor by teaching her about appropriate appearance. My phone kept buzzing with similar stories. It was like the video had opened a floodgate. People who'd been quiet for years were finally talking. Raymond's call came 2 days after the family chat exploded with stories. He asked if we could meet for coffee, and his voice sounded tired and confused. I agreed because he was one of the few people who hadn't immediately picked a side. We met at a place halfway between our apartments, and he looked like he hadn't slept much. He had a laptop bag with him and kept fidgeting with the zipper. When we sat down, he opened the laptop and turned it toward me. He'd been going through old family videos, the kind our parents recorded on bulky cameras in the 90s. He clicked play on one labeled My 10th Birthday Party. The video showed me in a pink dress surrounded by cousins and presents. Then Dolores walked into frame and grabbed my hair from behind. You could see my whole body jerk backward, and the cake plate I was holding fell and shattered on the floor. Everyone in the video laughed like it was funny. My mom picked up the broken plate while Dolores kept holding my hair and saying something to the camera about clumsy children. The video me had tears in my eyes, but I was smiling because that's what you do at your own birthday party. Raymond stopped the video and looked at me with this horrible expression. He apologized for not protecting me, and his voice cracked when he said it. He admitted he always thought Dolores was just being affectionate in her own weird way. He never realized how much it hurt, or how often it happened. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and drank my coffee. Raymond clicked through more videos, and there were dozens of moments where Dolores had her hands in my hair or was pulling me toward her by it. In one video from a family reunion, I was maybe 12 and trying to walk away from her, but she had my hair wrapped around her hand like a leash. Raymond closed the laptop and put his head in his hands. He started talking about his father, my grandfather, who died when I was still a baby. He said his dad used to tell him that Dolores had a cruel streak and enjoyed having power over people smaller than her. Raymond always thought his father was being dramatic or holding on to old marriage resentments. Now he was watching video evidence that his father was right, and he'd ignored it. He wondered out loud what else his father tried to warn him about that he dismissed. Then he admitted Dolores had been calling him every single day since the party. She demanded he make me apologize and forced me to take back everything I'd said to the family. She wanted him to tell everyone that I was lying about the abuse, and that the video from the party was edited to make her look bad. Raymond said he'd been avoiding her calls for 3 days because he didn't know what to say anymore. Every time his phone rang with her number, he felt sick. We sat there for almost an hour while he processed 18 years of abuse he'd witnessed and excused. I went back to work after our coffee meeting, but I couldn't focus. My coworkers kept asking if I was okay, and I kept saying I was fine. A week crawled by with more family drama playing out in text messages and phone calls. Then on Tuesday morning, Dolores showed up at my workplace. I work in a small office with about 15 people, and we have a reception area where clients wait. I was at my desk when one of my coworkers came back and said there was someone demanding to see me. I walked to the front, and there was Dolores standing in the middle of the reception area. She was wearing an expensive wig that looked nothing like her old extensions. This one was shorter and darker and obviously fake. She pointed at me the second I appeared and started yelling about family loyalty. Her voice carried through the whole office. She said ungrateful children who destroy their elders for attention don't deserve successful careers. She said I should be ashamed to show my face in public after what I did to her. My manager came out of her office to see what the noise was about. Dolores turned on her and demanded she fire me immediately for being a liar and an abuser. My manager asked Dolores to leave, but she refused and got louder. She started listing all my supposed crimes against her, including the fake story about stealing from her purse. 2 of my coworkers were standing there watching with their mouths open. Our building security guard finally came up from the lobby after someone called down. He's this older guy named Phil who's always nice to everyone. He tried to talk to Dolores calmly, but she screamed at him that he was enabling an abuser by working in the same building as me. Phil had to physically escort her toward the door while she yelled the whole way. She grabbed onto the doorframe and kept shouting that I'd pay for humiliating her and turning her own son against her. Phil finally got her outside, and she stood on the sidewalk screaming up at the building windows until he threatened to call the actual police. My manager pulled me into her office after Dolores left. I was shaking and embarrassed that my family drama had invaded my workplace. I started apologizing, but my manager held up her hand and asked if I needed to file a police report or get a restraining order. Her concern surprised me because I expected her to be angry about the disruption. Instead, she told me about her own grandmother, who used to lock her in closets as punishment when she was little. She said abusive family members often escalate when they lose control, and I should take Dolores's behavior seriously. She gave me the rest of the day off and told me to take care of myself. I cried in the parking lot because I'd expected judgment but got kindness instead. That evening, Mom showed up at my apartment with a cardboard box. She'd been going through old photo albums at her house and brought them over. We sat on my couch and she opened the first album to pictures of me as a toddler. In almost every single photo, Dolores's hand was tangled in my hair, or grabbing my arm or pulling me close. There were pictures where you could see pain on my face while everyone else smiled for the camera. Mom turned pages slowly and pointed out photo after photo showing the same pattern. Holiday dinners with Dolores's hand in my hair. Birthday parties with her gripping my shoulder hard enough to leave marks. Family portraits where she had me positioned exactly where she wanted me with her fingers twisted in my curls. Mom's hands shook as she flipped through the albums. She admitted she'd normalized the behavior because her own mother did the same thing to her growing up. Dolores used to pull Mom's hair and pinch her and control where she stood and what she wore. Mom thought it was just how Dolores showed love because that's what she'd been told her whole childhood. She apologized for not protecting me better and for teaching me to accept treatment that should never have been acceptable. We both cried looking at those photos and seeing the evidence of abuse that everyone had ignored for so long. Kevin came home while Mom was still there and found us surrounded by photo albums. Mom left after hugging me hard and promising to do better. Kevin and I ordered food, but neither of us ate much. He'd been patient through everything, but that night he finally said what he'd been thinking. He suggested I should cut off contact with any family member still defending Dolores. I argued that it wasn't that simple because these were people I'd known my whole life. He fired back that they'd watched me be abused my whole life and done nothing to stop it. His voice got loud, and I got defensive, and suddenly we were having our first real fight about the situation. I accused him of not understanding how complicated family relationships are. He said I was making excuses for people who'd failed me repeatedly. We both ended up crying because we were stressed and scared about what this whole situation was doing to us and our relationship. I went to bed angry, and he slept on the couch. The next morning, I apologized for snapping at him. He apologized for pushing me to make decisions I wasn't ready for. We agreed that I needed to set boundaries at my own pace, and he needed to trust that I knew what was best for my own healing. The fight actually brought us closer because we learned to communicate about hard things instead of just being supportive and nice all the time. We were learning that real support sometimes meant disagreeing and working through it together. 2 days later, the family group chat exploded again. Dolores had started calling extended family members individually with a new accusation. She claimed I'd stolen money from her purse at the party. She was telling people I took $300 while she was distracted by her fall. This was a complete lie, and several people who were at the party confirmed I never went near her purse. But the accusation was designed to make me look criminal instead of just disrespectful. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. She wanted people to think I wasn't just standing up to abuse, but actually stealing from an elderly woman. Some relatives believed her at first, until others pointed out that I'd left the party immediately after she fell, and security camera footage from the venue would prove I never went inside her house. The accusation fell apart fast, but the damage was done because now some people wondered what else might be lies. Then something unexpected happened. Jack Moody, Dolores' brother, who I'd only met twice in my life, flew in from across the country. He called me and asked to meet with several family members at once. We gathered at Raymond's house, and Jack laid out a pattern of Dolores' cruelty going back 60 years. He had stories from their childhood about her hurting smaller kids and blaming them for making her do it. He talked about family members who'd moved away specifically to escape her, and how she'd driven wedges between relatives to maintain control. Jack admitted he'd moved across the country decades ago, specifically to get away from his sister. He said he'd felt guilty ever since for leaving younger family members to deal with her alone. He'd kept minimal contact and only came back for major events. Hearing about the party incident and seeing the videos finally made him realize he couldn't stay silent anymore. 3 weeks after the party, a legal envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was a letter from Dolores' lawyer threatening to sue me for emotional distress and damage to her reputation. The letter claimed I'd deliberately caused her fall and publicly humiliated her. It said she was suffering from anxiety and depression, requiring medical treatment because of my actions. The letter demanded a formal apology and financial compensation for her medical bills and therapy costs. Kevin's parents had a lawyer friend they recommended, and I called him the same day. He read the letter and said it was mostly intimidation tactics, with no real legal basis. He explained that Dolores would have to prove I intended to harm her, but the video evidence showed she grabbed my hair first and I simply moved away. He offered to send a response letter for $250, which seemed reasonable for what he'd be doing. Kevin pulled out his wallet before I could even reach for my purse and handed over his credit card to the lawyer's assistant. I started to protest, but Kevin squeezed my hand and told me he didn't want me worrying about money on top of everything else happening. The lawyer said he'd have the response letter ready within 3 business days and would email me a draft to approve before sending it to Dolores' attorney. Walking out of that office felt like the first time I'd taken a full breath in weeks because someone with actual legal knowledge had confirmed I wasn't crazy or overreacting. The response letter arrived in my email 2 days later, and reading it made me cry. The lawyer had laid out the entire 18-year pattern of physical abuse in clear professional language that made it impossible to dismiss as family drama or misunderstanding. He'd requested statements from Mom, Kylie, and 3 other cousins who'd witnessed Dolores grabbing my hair at various family events. Each statement was attached as an exhibit with specific dates and descriptions of what they'd seen. Mom's statement was 3 pages long and included incidents I'd forgotten about or blocked out, like the time Dolores yanked my hair so hard at my 8th grade graduation that I stumbled off the stage stairs. Kylie's statement focused on her wedding and included testimony from 2 bridesmaids who'd heard me gasp in pain during the ceremony. The lawyer had also pulled still frames from the videos people took at the birthday party, showing the exact sequence of events from Dolores grabbing my hair to her falling into the dessert table. The stills made it crystal clear that I'd simply stepped sideways and she'd refused to let go. The letter concluded with a paragraph stating that any lawsuit Dolores filed would result in an immediate countersuit for assault and battery spanning 18 years, and the evidence strongly supported my case. It mentioned that hair pulling causing neck injuries constitutes assault under state law, and multiple witnesses could testify to repeated incidents. I approved the letter, and the lawyer sent it certified mail the next day. Dolores' lawyer must have received it within a week, because the threatening calls and texts stopped completely. Raymond called me 2 weeks later sounding exhausted and told me his mother had backed down from the legal threat after her attorney advised her she had no case. But instead of accepting defeat, Dolores had shifted tactics entirely. She'd called Raymond crying about chest pains and insisted he take her to the emergency room immediately. He'd rushed over thinking she was having a heart attack, but by the time they got to the hospital, her chest pains had mysteriously improved. The doctors ran tests anyway and found absolutely nothing wrong with her heart. Her blood pressure was slightly elevated, but normal for someone her age dealing with stress. The cardiologist who reviewed her results told Raymond that his mother appeared to be experiencing anxiety symptoms, possibly related to recent family conflicts, and recommended she see a therapist to develop better coping strategies. Raymond said Dolores had refused to even consider therapy and insisted the doctor was wrong, that her family's cruelty was literally killing her, and everyone would be sorry when she died from the stress we'd caused. Raymond suggested therapy again when they got back to Dolores' house, and that's when everything blew up between them. Dolores fired him as her power of attorney on the spot, screaming that he'd chosen his ungrateful niece over his own mother. She told him to get out of her house and said she never wanted to speak to him again. Raymond left, but called me the next day asking if we could meet for coffee because he needed to talk to someone who'd understand. We met at the same coffee shop where we'd talked before, and he looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. He kept saying he knew his mother had problems and had hurt people, but she was still his mom, and he loved her, and now she'd completely cut him out of her life. I told him I understood that grief, that feeling of losing a parent who's still alive, but refuses to see how their behavior hurts people. We sat there for 2 hours just talking about what it felt like to love someone who caused so much pain and how hard it was to accept that sometimes people you love won't change no matter how much you want them to. Raymond admitted he'd spent his whole life making excuses for his mother and trying to keep peace in the family, and he was finally seeing how much damage that had caused. He apologized again for not protecting me when I was younger, and I told him I forgave him because he'd been conditioned to enable her behavior just like everyone else. Mom called me 3 weeks after the lawyer's letter went out and said she wanted to organize a family meeting for anyone who wanted to discuss how to move forward without Dolores. She'd been talking to other relatives and realized how many people were struggling with the same feelings of guilt, anger, and confusion about what had happened. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at Mom's house, and she made it clear that Dolores was not invited and would not be told about it. I showed up expecting maybe 5 or 6 people, but 15 relatives were crowded into Mom's living room when I arrived. There were cousins I hadn't seen in years, including 2 who'd moved to different states specifically to get away from family drama. Mom had set up chairs in a circle and put out coffee and snacks, like this was some kind of support group, which I guess it was. We went around the circle sharing stories about Dolores, and it was awful and cathartic at the same time. Person after person described incidents of her grabbing, pinching, slapping, or verbally attacking them, usually disguised as concern or affection. My cousin Sarah talked about how Dolores had criticized her weight at every family gathering since she was 12 years old, always with a painful pinch to her stomach or arm. Another cousin described how Dolores had ruined her college graduation by making a scene about her dress being too revealing and physically trying to cover her with a shawl during the ceremony. We cried together as we realized how much of our family dysfunction had centered around managing Dolores's behavior and protecting her feelings while our own pain got completely dismissed. Someone pointed out that we'd all been taught to excuse her actions as just how she was, that she meant well, that we shouldn't take it personally, and we'd internalized that message so deeply that we'd spent years gaslighting ourselves about our own experiences. The meeting took an even more disturbing turn when we started comparing notes about specific incidents, and realized Dolores had been playing us against each other for decades. My cousin Jake mentioned that Dolores had told him 5 years ago that I'd said his wife was trashy and embarrassing to the family. I'd never said anything like that and actually liked his wife, but the comment had created tension between us for years. Then Kylie shared that Dolores had told her I was jealous of her wedding and had complained about having to be a bridesmaid. That was completely false and had made things weird between me and Kylie until we'd reconnected after the birthday party incident. Person after person shared similar stories of Dolores telling them that someone else had talked badly about them, creating conflicts that kept everyone divided and suspicious of each other. We pulled out our phones and started going through old texts and emails, finding receipts of her stirring up drama through selective information and outright lies. She'd tell one person that another relative was struggling financially and needed help, then tell that relative that the first person thought they were irresponsible with money. She'd share private information someone told her in confidence, then act shocked when it caused problems. The pattern was so clear once we laid it all out together, and we realized she'd been using these tactics to maintain control by ensuring we never got too close or united against her behavior. Kylie stood up and suggested we all agree to stop keeping Dolores's secrets and start being honest with each other about her behavior going forward. She proposed creating a family group chat without Dolores, where we could support each other and share information freely. Everyone agreed immediately, and we set it up right there in Mom's living room. We named it Family Support and made a pact to be truthful with each other, even when it was uncomfortable. Just having that space felt amazing, like we'd been holding our breath for years and could finally exhale. People started sharing things in the chat that same evening, posting memories and checking facts about things Dolores had told them. The group chat became this safe space where we could be honest about our family without fear of Dolores finding out and retaliating. We shared resources about dealing with difficult family members and setting boundaries. Several people posted articles about narcissistic family dynamics and controlling behavior, and reading them felt like someone had written a manual about our specific situation. Dolores found out about the group chat within a week because someone's notification popped up on their phone during a conversation with her. She lost her mind completely and started making posts on social media about being excluded and abused by her own family in her old age. The posts were written to make her look like a poor elderly woman whose cruel children had abandoned her for no reason. She talked about raising her kids with love and sacrifice, only to be cast aside when she needed them most. Her church friends flooded the comments with supportive messages about ungrateful children and the cruelty of modern families. Dolores screenshot all those sympathetic comments and sent them to family members in individual texts with messages about how strangers treated her better than her own blood. She posted about feeling isolated and unwanted, about crying herself to sleep because her family had turned against her. The posts were manipulative and one-sided, but they were also public, which meant her narrative was spreading beyond just our family. That's when several family members decided they were done protecting her reputation. Kylie commented on one of Dolores's posts with a brief statement about the 18 years of hair pulling I'd endured, including the incident at her wedding. Sarah posted about the body shaming and physical pinching she'd experienced since childhood. Jake shared the story about Dolores lying about what I'd supposedly said about his wife. Within hours, 5 more relatives had posted their own experiences with Dolores's controlling and abusive behavior in the comments of her public posts. The airing of family dysfunction was messy and uncomfortable, and part of me cringed seeing our private pain laid out for everyone to read. But it also meant Dolores couldn't control the narrative anymore. Her church friends started asking questions in the comments, wanting to hear both sides. Some of them began quietly reaching out to family members through private messages, saying they'd noticed concerning behavior from Dolores over the years, but hadn't felt it was their place to say anything. A few people from her church actually apologized for jumping to conclusions and said they hadn't known the full situation. Dolores deleted the original posts, but people had already screenshot them, and the screenshots got shared in our family group chat as documentation of what had happened. 6 weeks after the birthday party, Mom's phone rang early one morning, and it was Dolores. Mom put it on speaker so I could hear since I was visiting for breakfast. Dolores's voice sounded smaller than usual, less commanding. She told Mom that maybe she'd been too rough with me sometimes over the years, but she'd never meant to actually hurt anyone. She said she came from a generation where physical discipline and correction were normal, and she didn't realize people were so sensitive now. The non-apology made Mom's face go red, and I watched her grip the phone tighter. Mom told her mother that this wasn't about sensitivity or generational differences. It was about 18 years of deliberately causing physical pain to a child and then an adult. She said Dolores had been told multiple times to stop and had refused, that she'd laughed off complaints and escalated her behavior when people tried to set boundaries. Dolores tried to interrupt, but Mom kept talking, her voice shaking but firm. She told Dolores that until she could genuinely acknowledge the harm she'd caused without excuses or deflection, their relationship would remain distant. She said she was done prioritizing her mother's feelings over her daughter's safety and well-being. Dolores started crying and hung up, and Mom sat there staring at her phone with tears running down her face because standing up to her mother had taken everything she had. I made an appointment with a therapist the following week. The office was in a small building near the downtown area with beige walls and generic landscape paintings that were supposed to be calming. The therapist was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Chandler, who didn't try to hug me or act overly sympathetic, which I appreciated. She asked me to describe what brought me in, and I told her about the birthday party, the 18 years of hair pulling, the family conflict that followed. She listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she asked how I felt about what happened. I said I didn't know how to feel, that I was relieved Dolores couldn't hurt me anymore, but also sad about losing the grandmother I'd always wanted her to be. Dr. Chandler explained that I was grieving 2 different things at once. The actual grandmother who hurt me and the fantasy grandmother I'd imagined could exist if she just changed. She said both feelings were valid and I didn't have to choose one over the other. That made something click in my brain, like permission to feel complicated things without having to sort them into good or bad categories. Over the next few weeks, Dr. Chandler helped me understand that standing up to abuse didn't make me cruel, and feeling sad about family conflict didn't mean I'd made the wrong choice. She taught me that healing wasn't linear, and some days I'd feel strong and other days I'd feel guilty, and that was normal. The therapy sessions became a place where I could say things I couldn't tell my family, where I could admit I sometimes missed the version of Dolores who existed before the party, even though that version had hurt me constantly. 2 months after the party, Kevin took me to the botanical gardens where we'd had our first date 3 years earlier. We walked through the rose section and he kept acting nervous, fidgeting with something in his pocket. When we reached the fountain in the center of the garden, he got down on one knee and pulled out a small velvet box. He said watching me set boundaries and stand up for myself had made him love me even more, because it showed I knew my worth. He wanted to build a life with someone who wouldn't accept mistreatment from anyone, including him. The ring was simple and beautiful, a single diamond on a silver band. I said yes, before he even finished asking the question. We sat on the fountain edge for an hour making plans, and he promised our wedding would have clear boundaries about Dolores. If she attended, there would be rules about her behavior and consequences if she broke them. We agreed we wouldn't let anyone, even family, ruin the most important day of our lives. Kevin kissed me and said he was proud of me for everything I'd survived and everything I'd become. The engagement news spread through the family within hours because my mom called everyone she knew. Most people sent congratulations and excited messages. But the next day, Raymond called and said Dolores had phoned him crying about being excluded from her granddaughter's wedding. She was convinced we weren't going to invite her and that the whole family was turning her into an outcast. Raymond sounded tired when he told me this, like he'd been listening to her complaints for hours. He said he'd tried to explain that her invitation depended on her willingness to acknowledge what she'd done and commit to treating me with respect. Dolores had responded by screaming that she had nothing to apologize for and that I was manipulating everyone against her. Then she'd hung up on him. Raymond apologized for his mother's behavior, and said he supported whatever decision Kevin and I made about the wedding. He admitted he was exhausted from being caught in the middle, but he wasn't going to pressure me to include someone who refused to take responsibility for years of abuse. The conversation made me sad because Raymond was losing his relationship with his mother too, and he hadn't done anything wrong except finally see the truth. 3 months after the party, a letter arrived in my mailbox with Dolores' handwriting on the envelope. My hands shook when I opened it because I didn't know what to expect. The letter was 3 pages long and written in her careful cursive. Most of it was exactly what I expected. She talked about how hurt she was, how the family had abandoned her, how she'd always tried her best to be a good grandmother. She claimed she came from a different generation where physical affection was expressed differently. She said young people today were too sensitive and couldn't handle normal family interactions. But buried in the middle of the second page, between complaints about her loneliness and her health problems, was a single sentence that made me stop breathing. She wrote that maybe she had hurt me sometimes and she was sorry if I felt pain from her actions. It wasn't the full apology I deserved. The word "if" made it conditional, like my pain might not be real or valid. But my therapist had been preparing me for this possibility, that Dolores might never be capable of full accountability. Dr. Chandler said some people can only apologize in small, imperfect ways because true accountability would shatter their self-image. She helped me see the sentence as the most honest acknowledgement Dolores might ever give. It was something, even if it wasn't everything. I kept the letter in my desk drawer and read it several times over the next few days, trying to decide what to do with this tiny crack in Dolores' wall of denial. I spent a week writing my response letter. Dr. Chandler helped me craft it during our sessions, making sure it was clear and firm without being cruel. I listed specific boundaries that would need to be in place for Dolores to be part of my life. No touching my hair ever, for any reason. No criticism of my appearance, weight, job, relationship, or life choices. No public scenes or manipulation tactics like crying to get her way or threatening family members. No playing victim or spreading lies about me to relatives. I explained that she could attend family events if she agreed to these terms, but any violation would result in immediate removal and a period of no contact. The letter was direct and businesslike, more like a contract than a personal note. Sending it felt powerful, like I was finally taking control of a relationship that had controlled me for 18 years. I mailed it on a Thursday afternoon and felt lighter walking away from the post office, like I'd set down something heavy I'd been carrying my entire life. Dolores received my letter and immediately drove to Mom's house with it clutched in her hand. Mom called me right after to describe what happened. Dolores had shown up crying and waving the letter around, saying it was cold and legalistic and proved I didn't love her. She demanded Mom talk sense into me and make me apologize for setting such harsh rules. Mom had stood in her doorway and told Dolores that the boundaries were reasonable and necessary. She'd said these were basic expectations for how to treat people with respect and dignity. Dolores had tried the guilt trip approach, talking about how old she was and how she might not have much time left. Mom had responded that age didn't excuse abuse, and Dolores had plenty of time to learn how to treat her family better. Dolores had left angry, getting into her car and slamming the door hard enough that Mom's neighbor came outside to check if everything was okay. But the important part was that Dolores hadn't rejected the terms completely. She hadn't torn up the letter or said she'd never agree. She'd just left angry, which Mom and I both recognized as progress. At least she was considering the boundaries instead of immediately dismissing them. Thanksgiving came 4 months after the birthday party. Raymond offered to host at his house under the condition that everyone agreed to keep things peaceful. He sent out a group text making it clear that anyone who started drama would be asked to leave immediately. Dolores showed up wearing a nice pantsuit and a wig that looked more natural than her old extensions. She was stiff and formal when she greeted me, like we were business associates instead of family. She didn't try to touch my hair or make any comments about my appearance. During dinner, she sat at the opposite end of the table and mostly talked to Raymond's wife about gardening. When someone asked her to pass the rolls, she did it without any passive-aggressive comments. The meal was awkward and tense, with lots of careful conversation and people watching Dolores to see if she'd cause a scene. But nothing bad happened. We ate turkey and stuffing and pumpkin pie and everyone went home without any fights or tears. Several cousins texted me afterward saying it was the first holiday meal without drama in years. The bar was incredibly low, that we were celebrating basic civility as a major achievement. But it still felt like progress, like maybe Dolores was capable of change even if that change was small and grudging. Christmas followed the same pattern. Dolores attended dinner at Mom's house and followed the boundaries without any major violations. She did make passive-aggressive comments about walking on eggshells around her own family and having to watch every word she said. Raymond shut her down quickly, reminding her that treating people with respect wasn't walking on eggshells. It was basic decency that everyone else managed just fine. Dolores pouted and looked wounded, but she didn't escalate into a full scene. She ate her dinner quietly and left early, claiming she was tired. Mom hugged me after she left and said she was proud of both of us for maintaining boundaries even when it was uncomfortable. The holidays felt strange without the usual chaos and conflict. I kept waiting for Dolores to explode or cause drama, but she seemed to be genuinely trying, even if her effort came with complaints and attitude. It wasn't the warm family celebration I'd dreamed about as a kid, but it was peaceful and safe, which felt more valuable. Kevin and I set our wedding date for the following June and sent out save the date cards in January. We included a personal note with Dolores's invitation, reminding her of the boundaries we'd established. The note was polite but clear, stating that any violation of the agreed terms would result in her being escorted out by security. We weren't taking chances on our wedding day. A week later, an envelope arrived with Dolores's RSVP card marked yes and a check for $500. The check memo line said engagement gift in her careful handwriting. Kevin thought it was her way of trying to buy back goodwill and favor. I agreed but decided to accept it as a peace offering anyway. We put the money toward our venue deposit and I sent her a thank you card acknowledging the gift. It felt transactional and weird, like we were negotiating a business deal instead of building a family relationship. But transactional and weird was better than violent and abusive, so I took it as progress. My hair had always been wrapped up in my relationship with Dolores, tangled in 18 years of pain and control. After the wedding planning started, I looked at myself in the mirror and realized I'd been growing it long, partly because cutting it felt like letting her win. I made an appointment at a nice salon downtown, not the place where Dolores got her extensions done. The stylist was a young guy with blue streaks in his hair who asked what I wanted. I told him to cut off 6 inches and shape it into something that felt lighter. He worked for an hour, cutting and styling while we talked about normal things like music and weekend plans. When he finished and spun my chair around to face the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My hair still reached past my shoulders, but it had movement and shape instead of just hanging heavy down my back. I felt physically lighter, like I'd been carrying extra weight and finally set it down. I took a selfie in the salon chair and posted it to social media with a simple caption about trying something new. Within an hour, family members were commenting with supportive messages and heart emojis. I scrolled through the comments looking for Dolores's name and didn't find it. She hadn't liked or commented on the post at all. Her silence felt like the biggest victory, proof that she was learning to keep her opinions about my appearance to herself. My hair was mine again, finally free from her hands and her control and her obsession. I ran my fingers through the shorter length and smiled at my reflection, recognizing the person looking back at me for the first time in years. 6 months after the party, Raymond called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at work. His voice sounded different, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying something heavy and finally set it down. He told me Dolores had started seeing a therapist at her doctor's insistence after her blood pressure spiked during a routine checkup. The doctor apparently asked about stress, and Dolores broke down crying in the exam room, admitting she couldn't sleep and felt anxious all the time. Raymond said the doctor wrote a referral right there and told Dolores her health depended on dealing with whatever was causing the anxiety. She's going once a week now, though Raymond doubted she was being completely honest with the therapist about her behavior. Still, the fact that she showed up to appointments at all meant something had shifted. He said Dolores mentioned the therapy helped her understand that losing control of family relationships was making her physically sick. I thanked Raymond for telling me and we hung up. The news sat strange in my chest. Not quite hope, but not quite indifference either. 3 weeks later, one of my younger cousins had a birthday party at a restaurant downtown. I almost didn't go because I knew Dolores would be there, but Kevin convinced me that hiding from family events meant she still controlled my choices. We arrived late and found seats at the end of the long table they'd reserved. Dolores sat near the middle, wearing a nicer wig than the one from Thanksgiving, this one a natural brown color that actually suited her. She glanced up when we sat down, but didn't say anything. The dinner went normally with people passing dishes and talking about work and kids. Then Dolores got up to use the bathroom and stopped behind my chair on her way back. My whole body tensed waiting for her hand to reach out. Instead, she leaned down slightly and said my hair looked pretty today, then kept walking to her seat. The comment was so brief and awkward that I almost thought I imagined it. But Kevin heard it too and squeezed my hand under the table. It was the first positive thing Dolores had said about my appearance in 23 years without adding a criticism or touching me. I turned in my seat and said thank you, and she nodded once before picking up her fork. We both went back to our meals like nothing major had happened, but my heart was beating fast. 2 months later, Kevin's parents hosted an engagement party for us at their house. They have a big backyard with string lights and a patio, and his mom went all out with decorations and food. We invited both sides of the family, which meant Dolores got an invitation with the same boundary reminder we'd been including on everything. She RSVP'd yes and showed up on time wearing a floral dress and the brown wig. I watched her walk through the gate and braced myself for something to go wrong, but she headed straight to the gift table, set down a wrapped box, then found Kevin's mother near the drinks. They talked for at least 10 minutes while I stood across the yard pretending not to stare. Dolores smiled and laughed at something Kevin's mom said. She held her cup with both hands and nodded along to the conversation like a completely normal grandmother at a family party. Kevin's dad came over and joined them, and Dolores shook his hand and kept talking. The whole scene looked so ordinary that it made me realize how much energy she used to spend on being cruel and controlling. All that effort she put into grabbing hair and making scenes and keeping everyone anxious could have gone into just being pleasant. Watching her act appropriate for 2 straight hours felt surreal. The party was winding down when one of my younger cousins pulled me aside near the back fence. She's 19 and had been at Dolores' birthday party when everything happened. She told me she needed to say something she'd been thinking about for months. Then she started crying and said watching me stand up to Dolores that day changed her life. Her own mother had been controlling her the same way, not with hair pulling, but with constant criticism and manipulation and guilt trips. Seeing me set boundaries and refuse to accept abuse anymore inspired her to do the same thing with her mom. She'd started therapy and learned to say no and protect herself from harmful behavior. She thanked me for showing her it was possible to love family members while still keeping yourself safe from them. Her words hit me so hard I started crying too. We hugged in the corner of the yard while the party continued around us. Something good had come from that awful day at the garden party. My pain had helped someone else find their strength. 8 months after the original party, Mom texted asking if I wanted to go wedding dress shopping with her and Kylie. We set a date for the following Saturday and made appointments at 3 different bridal shops. The morning of, I was getting ready when my phone rang with Dolores' number. My stomach dropped, seeing her name on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Dolores asked if she could come dress shopping with us. Her voice was quiet and careful, not demanding like usual. I stood in my bedroom holding the phone and trying to process the request. Finally, I said yes, but told her clearly this was a supportive event with no criticism allowed. She agreed immediately and asked where to meet us. I texted her the address of the first shop and spent the drive there feeling nervous. Dolores was already waiting outside when we pulled up. She smiled when she saw us and held the door open. The first 2 shops didn't have anything I loved, but the third place had a whole section of dresses that felt right. I tried on 6 different styles while Mom and Kylie sat on the couch giving opinions. Dolores sat in the corner chair and watched quietly. When I came out in the 7th dress, a simple A-line with lace sleeves, everyone went silent. Mom started crying and Kylie said it was perfect. I turned to look in the mirror and knew immediately this was the one. When I glanced back at the couch, Dolores had tears running down her face. She wiped them away quickly but kept staring at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Back in the dressing room with just Dolores and the consultant, Dolores stepped closer while I stood on the platform. She looked up at me and said, "I looked beautiful." Then she said she was proud of the woman I'd become. The words came out shaky but genuine. It was such a normal grandmother thing to say that I couldn't quite believe it was happening. She didn't try to touch my hair or my dress. She didn't add any criticism about my weight or suggest changes. For 2 whole hours at that bridal shop, I got to experience what having a kind grandmother might feel like. The consultant pinned the dress and took measurements while Dolores asked appropriate questions about the timeline and alterations. She offered to pay for my veil when we picked one out, and I let her because the gesture felt sincere. Walking out of that shop with my dress ordered and Dolores acting normal felt like stepping into an alternate universe where our relationship had always been healthy. The progress wasn't perfect or consistent after that. Dolores still had moments where her old patterns tried to surface, and someone had to remind her of the boundaries. At a family cookout in July, she reached for my hair while we were standing near the grill and caught herself halfway through the motion. Her hand froze in the air for a second before she pulled it back and apologized. Raymond was standing right there and gently told her she needed to be more careful. She got defensive and said she was just going to fix a piece that was sticking up, but then she stopped arguing and walked away to calm down. The frequency of these moments decreased over time. By August, she could be around me for whole events without any boundary violations. She was learning slowly that maintaining relationships required respecting other people's comfort and not just her own desires. Some family members stayed distant from her even with the changes. 2 of my cousins refused to attend events where she'd be present, and Dolores had to accept that those were consequences of years of harmful behavior that couldn't be fixed with a few months of therapy. My wedding day arrived in June with clear skies and perfect weather. I got ready in a suite at the venue with Mom and Kylie and my bridesmaids. My hands shook while the makeup artist worked on my face because I kept thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The ceremony started at 4, and I walked down the aisle holding my stepdad's arm while Kevin waited at the altar. Dolores sat quietly in the 3rd row wearing a tasteful navy dress and her natural-looking wig. She didn't try to control anything or make the day about her. She cried during the vows like grandmothers are supposed to cry at weddings, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. During the reception, she approached me once while I was talking to guests near the cake table. She said congratulations and that she hoped I'd be happy, then returned to her assigned table without lingering or demanding attention. It was the most appropriate she'd ever been at a family event. I watched her sit back down and talk to the relatives at her table like a normal person, and the absence of drama felt almost as significant as the wedding itself. Kevin and I danced our first dance as a married couple to a song we'd picked months earlier. The DJ's lights swept across the reception hall, and I could see all our family and friends watching from their tables. Mom was crying happy tears and wiping her face with her napkin. Raymond stood near the bar, smiling proudly and raising his glass. Even Dolores looked content sitting at her table with her hands folded. The absence of drama and tension made the celebration feel lighter and more joyful than any family gathering I could remember. No one was walking on eggshells or bracing for Dolores to cause a scene. Everyone was just present and happy and celebrating with us. Kevin spun me around and I laughed, and the sound echoed through the hall, mixing with the music and conversation. This was what family events were supposed to feel like. 6 months into our marriage, Kevin and I hosted Thanksgiving at our new house. We'd bought a small place with a yard and spent weeks getting it ready for company. I cooked for 2 days straight, making turkey and sides and pies. Dolores showed up on time carrying a pumpkin pie she'd made herself. She handed it to me at the door and asked where I wanted her to put her coat. The whole day went smoothly with everyone eating and talking and playing games in the living room. Dolores followed all the boundaries without complaint. She didn't touch my hair once or make any critical comments. She helped clean up after dinner and thanked us for hosting before she left. She wasn't the warm, loving grandmother I'd wished for as a child. She didn't hug me or tell me she loved me or ask about my life with genuine interest. But she was learning to be respectful and appropriate, and that felt like enough. I'd learned through therapy and time that sometimes the best outcome isn't perfect reconciliation, but peaceful coexistence with clear boundaries. Dolores would probably never fully understand the damage she'd caused or take complete responsibility for 18 years of abuse. But she was trying to be better, and I was learning to accept the relationship we actually had instead of mourning the one I'd never get. Standing in my kitchen that night washing dishes with Kevin, I felt genuinely okay with that. So yeah, that happened. I don't even know how we got here, but thanks for sticking around. This honestly feels more like a late-night chat than a video.